Somewhere in a Roman prison cell, chains cutting into his wrists, a man picked up a pen. He was awaiting execution, and in that darkness he did not write about fear, he wrote about faith. He wrote the words that would become the most quoted, most memorized, most powerful chapter in the entire Bible, a chapter that has given courage to martyrs facing lions, to soldiers facing death, to ordinary people facing the collapse of everything they knew. It is called the Hall of Faith, and by the time you finish this video, you will understand why Hebrews chapter 11 is not just a list of ancient names, it is the blueprint for surviving anything life throws at you.
If you love the Bible, Jesus, God, and the Christian faith, please subscribe. Now let's continue.
The letter to the Hebrews was written to people on the edge of giving up, Jewish believers in the first century, scattered, persecuted, watching their temple and their world crumbling around them. Some tempted to abandon their faith and return to the familiar comfort of the old ways. And so the author begins with a definition that has echoed for 2,000 years. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Not a feeling, not a guess. Substance, evidence, something real enough to build a life on even when your eyes can't confirm it yet. And then, one by one, the author begins calling forward the witnesses, ordinary people who trusted an invisible God in the middle of visible chaos. The first name spoken is Abel, the son of Adam and Eve, born just outside the ashes of Eden. Abel brought God an offering from the firstborn of his flock, given in faith, and it was accepted. His brother Cain brought an offering from the ground, and his was not. Cain's jealousy turned to rage, and in a field, away from every other human eye, Cain became the first murderer in history, killing his own brother. But here is what the chapter says next, and it should stop you cold. Abel, being dead, still speaks. His blood cried out from the ground. The very first act of faith recorded in the Bible ended in bloodshed, and yet God declared that faith does not die when the body does. It speaks across generations. It is still speaking right now through this very video. Then comes Enoch, a man who appears for only a handful of verses in the book of Genesis, yet whose story is almost too strange to comprehend. Enoch walked with God, not attended church, not offered sacrifices, walked with God as a companion walks beside a friend, day after day, year after year, for 300 years. And then, Genesis says simply, he was not, for God took him. Enoch did not die. He was taken directly into the presence of God, skipping death entirely, because his life pleased God so completely that heaven simply reached down and brought him home early. And then the chapter moves to a name we've spent time with before on this channel, Noah. Warned by God about things not yet seen, in an age when the sky had never once produced rain, Noah believed a promise that defied every law of nature he had ever witnessed. For over a century he built, while the world around him mocked, while his own neighbors called him insane for constructing a massive vessel on dry land under a cloudless sky. And when the flood came, when the fountains of the deep broke open and the heavens themselves emptied out, Noah's faith condemned the world and made him an heir of righteousness that comes by faith. But now the chapter arrives at the man that becomes its centerpiece, Abraham. Called by God to leave everything, his country, his family, his father's household, and go to a place God would show him later, not now, later. He obeyed, not knowing where he was going. Imagine that, a grown man uprooting his entire life, walking into the desert toward a destination God refused to name in advance. He lived as a stranger in the land he'd been promised, dwelling in tents because he was looking for a city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Abraham's wife, Sarah, is named here too, and her story is almost impossible to believe. Barren her entire life, then told at 90 years old that she would bear a son. Genesis records that she laughed at the promise, and yet the chapter says, through faith, Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed when she was past age. From one man, as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. Then comes the moment that has shaken believers for thousands of years. Abraham, tested by God, was told to take his promised son, his only son Isaac, the child of the impossible, up a mountain and offer him as a sacrifice. Abraham obeyed. He raised the knife, and Hebrews reveals the staggering logic behind his obedience. He reasoned that God was able to raise Isaac even from the dead. At the very last second, an angel stopped his hand, and a ram appeared, caught in a thicket, provided by God as the substitute. It was never truly about Isaac's death. It was a preview, written centuries in advance, of another father who would one day offer his only son on a different mountain and not stop the blade.
The chapter keeps moving, faster now, naming faith after faith. Isaac blessing his sons concerning things to come. Jacob dying, still blessing each of his grandsons and worshiping God even while leaning on his staff. Blind and near death, still trusting the promise would outlive him. Joseph sold into slavery by his own brothers, rising to power in Egypt, and at the very end of his life, giving instructions concerning his bones, commanding that when Israel finally left Egypt, they carry his remains with them, because he believed, centuries before it happened, that the Exodus was coming. And then Moses, hidden by his parents for 3 months because they saw he was a beautiful child and were not afraid of the king's command to kill every Hebrew baby boy. Raised in Pharaoh's own palace with every luxury Egypt could offer, Moses grew up and made a choice that defies every human instinct for self-preservation. He refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. He esteemed the reproach of the coming Messiah greater riches than all the treasures of Egypt. By faith, Moses forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king. By faith, he kept the Passover, painting blood on doorframes so that the angel of death would pass over every home marked by it. By faith, the people crossed the Red Sea as if walking on dry ground, while the pursuing Egyptian army, attempting the very same crossing, drowned in the returning waters. By faith, the chapter says, the walls of Jericho fell down after the people marched around them for 7 days, trusting a battle plan that made no military sense whatsoever. And by faith, Rahab the harlot, a Canaanite woman with no bloodline claimed to Israel's God, hid the Israelite spies and was not destroyed with those who did not believe, because she had heard what God had done and staked her life on it anyway. And then the author seems to run out of time and space. And what shall I more say, he writes, for the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, of David also and Samuel and the prophets. Ordinary and extraordinary people who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to flight the armies of aliens. But then the chapter takes a turn that most people miss entirely. It does not end in victory, it ends in suffering. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yes, moreover of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. Read that again. The same chapter that celebrates walls falling and seas parting also honors people who were sawn in half and still did not let go of their faith.
This is the part of Hebrews 11 that television preachers rarely quote because it destroys the idea that faith always means winning. Sometimes faith looks like a kingdom conquered. Sometimes faith looks like a body broken, with the soul refusing to bend. And then comes the verse that ties every single name together, the verse that reframes the entire chapter. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise, God having provided some better thing for us, that they, without us, should not be made perfect. Every person on this list, Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Rahab, and the nameless multitudes who were tortured and sawn in half, died without seeing the fullness of what they were promised. They lived and died in the tension between the promise and its fulfillment. They saw it only from a distance and embraced it and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Why does this matter to you right now watching this? Because the very next words, immediately after this chapter ends, describe a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us. The heroes of Hebrews 11 are not simply historical figures in an ancient book. According to Scripture, they are witnesses, watching as we run our own race of faith. Abraham is watching. Moses is watching. The nameless martyrs who were sawn in half are watching. And the message across every single verse of this chapter is the same. Faith is not the absence of fear. It is not the absence of doubt, or delay, or suffering, or death itself. Faith is trusting the character of God, even when the evidence has not yet arrived. Noah trusted before the rain fell. Abraham trusted before the child was born. Moses trusted before the sea split. Rahab trusted before the walls came down. The chains around that Roman prisoner's wrists never made it into Hebrews 11, but his own life became the perfect commentary on everything he wrote. He believed in things not seen, and he wrote it anyway, so that 2,000 years later, in whatever prison you are sitting in right now, whether it is fear, or grief, or waiting, or doubt, you would remember that faith has never once required you to see the whole path. It has only ever required you to take the next step. And somewhere, on the other side of everything you cannot yet see, that promise is still waiting for you too.